Today we're discussing alcohol, one of the most commonly consumed substances on the planet Earth. I should mention that both humans and non-human animals consume alcohol, either for recreational purposes because they like the feeling that it gives them, or for medicinal purposes, or for other purposes that we'll discuss. When we ingest alcohol, the toxic effects of alcohol disrupt those mood circuitries, at first making them hyperactive. That's right, making them hyperactive. This is why people become really talkative. People start to feel really good after a few sips of alcohol, at least most people do. And then as they ingest more alcohol, or as that alcohol wears off, serotonin levels and the activity of those circuits really starts to drop. And that's why people feel less good. And typically what they do, they go and get another drink and they attempt to kind of restore that feeling of well-being and mood. Now, typically what happens is that as people ingest the third and fourth, maybe even the fifth drink, there's an absolute zero chance of them recovering that energized mood, right? Most people, as they drink more and more, will now start to feel more and more suppressed. The forebrain is now shutting down quite a lot of the motor cortical areas that control coordinated movement. There's a great depression, not depression of the psychiatric depression sort, but a depression of alertness and arousal, and eventually people will pass out.
A number of factors influence how and to what extent alcohol affects the brain, one including how much and how often a person drinks, the age at which he or she first began drinking, and how long he or she has been drinking, the person's age, level of education, gender, genetic background, and family history of alcoholism, whether he or she is at risk as a result of prenatal alcohol exposure, and his or her general health status.
A recent study, however, finally addressed the question of whether or not low to moderate amounts of alcohol consumption can cause brain degeneration. First of all, gray matter are the neurons, the so-called cell bodies that house the genome of the cells, etc. And white matter is the connections, the fibers, the so-called axons of neurons. And it's called white matter because that tissue is surrounded by a fatty tissue called myelin, which allows nerve cells to communicate with each other very quickly. So what this study did is it looked at the brains, both the gray matter and the white matter, of more than 30,000, indeed more than 35,000 generally healthy middle-aged and older adults in the United Kingdom who were drinking various amounts of alcohol. What they found was that even for people that were drinking low to moderate amounts of alcohol, so 1 or 2 drinks per day, there was evidence of thinning of the neocortex, so loss of neurons in the neocortex, and other brain regions.
Thiamine deficiency is a common occurrence in people with alcoholism and results from poor overall nutrition. Thiamine, also known as vitamin B1, is an essential nutrient required by all tissues, including the brain. Thiamine is found in foods such as meat and poultry, whole grain cereals, nuts, and dried beans, peas, and soybeans. Many foods in the United States commonly are fortified with thiamine, including breads and cereals. As a result, most people consume sufficient amounts of thiamine in their diets. The typical intake for most Americans is 2 milligrams/day. The recommended daily allowance is 1.2 milligrams/day for men and 1.1 milligrams/day for women 14.
The liver is the first site in which alcohol is broken down or metabolized into its component parts. The liver is also communicating with the brain through chemical signaling and neural signaling. So we have the gut-liver-brain axis. And what you find is that people who ingest alcohol at any amount are inducing a disruption in the so-called gut microbiome, the trillions of little microbacteria that take resident in your gut and that live inside you all the time and that help support your immune system and that literally signal by way of electrical signals and chemical signals to your brain to increase the release of things like serotonin and dopamine and regulate your mood, generally in positive ways. Well, alcohol really disrupts those bacteria.
Most people realize that heavy, long-term drinking can damage the liver, the organ chiefly responsible for breaking down alcohol into harmless byproducts and clearing it from the body. But people may not be aware that prolonged liver dysfunction, such as liver cirrhosis resulting from excessive alcohol consumption, can harm the brain, leading to a serious and potentially fatal brain disorder known as hepatic encephalopathy. Hepatic encephalopathy can cause changes in sleep patterns, mood, and personality, psychiatric conditions such as anxiety and depression, severe cognitive effects such as shortened attention span, and problems with coordination such as a flapping or shaking of the hands called asterixis. In the most serious cases, patients may slip into a coma.
Alcohol kills bacteria, and it is indiscriminate with respect to which bacteria it kills. So when we ingest alcohol and it goes into our gut, it kills a lot of the healthy gut microbiota. At the same time, the metabolism of alcohol in the liver, which you now understand, that pathway involving NAD, acetaldehyde, and acetate, that pathway is pro-inflammatory, so it's increasing the release of inflammatory cytokines, things like IL-6, etc. All these pro-inflammatory molecules, those are being released. You've now got disruption of the gut microbiota. As a consequence, the lining of the gut is disrupted, and you develop, at least transiently, leaky gut. That is, bacteria that exist in the gut, which are bad bacteria, can now pass out of the gut into the bloodstream. So you've got a two-hit.
Up to 80% of alcoholics, however, have a deficiency in thiamine 15. And some of these people will go on to develop serious brain disorders such as Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, WKS-16. WKS is a disease that consists of two separate syndromes, a short-lived and severe condition called Wernicke's encephalopathy, and a long-lasting and debilitating condition known as Korsakoff's psychosis.
So what happens when alcohol gets into the brain that makes us feel tipsy or drunk, and in some people makes people feel really especially energized and happy? Well, it does seem to have a propensity or an affinity for particular brain areas that are involved in certain kinds of thinking and behavior. So one of the first things that happens is that there's a slight, at least after the first drink or second drink, there's a slight suppression in the activity of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. This is an area of your neocortex that's involved in thinking and planning, and perhaps above all, in suppression of impulsive behavior. So if you go to a party and they're serving alcohol and people are consuming drinks, what you'll notice is that a few minutes into that party, the volume of people's voices will increase. And that's because people are simply not paying attention to their voice modulation. As other people start speaking more loudly, other people are speaking more loudly. We've all had this experience. Oftentimes, it's just the fact that you've been shouting all night just to be heard, because as the prefrontal cortex shuts down, people stop modulating their level of speech quite as much.
Studies with animals show that high doses of alcohol lead to a disruption in the growth of new brain cells. Scientists believe it may be this lack of new growth that results in the long-term deficits found in key areas of the brain, such as hippocampal structure and function. Understanding how alcohol interacts with brain stem cells and what happens to these cells in alcoholics is the first step in establishing whether the use of stem cell therapies is an option for treatment.
People who are pregnant should absolutely not consume alcohol. Fetal alcohol syndrome is well known and established. It's terrible. Fetuses experience diminished brain development that's often permanent, diminished limb development, diminished organ development in the periphery, meaning the heart, the lungs, the liver, etc. Ingesting alcohol while pregnant is simply a bad idea.
Drinking during pregnancy can lead to a range of physical, learning, and behavioral effects in the developing brain, the most serious of which is a collection of symptoms known as fetal alcohol syndrome. Children with FAS may have distinct facial features. FAS infants also are markedly smaller than average. Their brains may have less volume, and they may have fewer numbers of brain cells or fewer neurons that are able to function correctly, leading to long-term problems in learning and behavior.
Some people believe that certain kinds of alcohol are not detrimental to fetuses. They'll say, well, champagne is safe for a pregnant mother to drink, but beer is not. That is absolutely categorically false. Alcohol is alcohol. Alcohol as a mutagen, I haven't used that word yet, but a substance that can mutate DNA through alterations in DNA methylation and these checkpoints in the cell cycle. Alcohol as a mutagen is one of the worst things that a developing embryo can be exposed to. And again, because it's water soluble and fat soluble, ingestion of alcohol when people are pregnant passes right to the fetus. Now, I realize that a number of people out there might be thinking, oh goodness, I didn't realize I was pregnant until a certain stage of pregnancy, and before I realized I was ingesting alcohol. Obviously, one can't undo what's been done, but I want to also emphasize that fetal alcohol syndrome, while yes, there's a full-blown syndrome that manifests as changes in the craniofacial development that are very obvious, and you can look these up. You've probably seen these before, the pictures before, rather. It has to do with eye spacing, forehead size, a number of other features of the craniofacial development. And of course, stuff's going on in the brain too. It's along a continuum.
Not drinking during pregnancy is the best form of prevention. FAS remains the leading preventable birth defect in the United States today.
Even though it's somewhat obvious or should be obvious, I really want to make clear that there's zero evidence whatsoever that certain forms of alcohol are safer for pregnant women to ingest than others. It's absolutely wrong. No one who's pregnant should be ingesting alcohol whatsoever. And certainly if people feel like they can't avoid alcohol while pregnant, they really need to work with somebody to make sure that it just absolutely doesn't happen, because it's so detrimental to the developing fetus.